Hello, hello, hello out there in podcast land. You are listening to Johnny Has the Keys, where we discuss science fiction and horror movie classics from the past, present, and potentially the future. I'm here with my good friend David. Hey, David.
Hey, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing well. And we've got another classic film for you today. But before so, let's. What's been going on in your week? I guess genre-related, maybe?
Genre-related, maybe. Nothing really. I've been
It
trying
doesn't have to be. It can be something else.
Yeah, I've been trying to, just catch up on stuff that we're going to cover and, try to prepare a little bit for it. But I am kind of trepidatiously awaiting the Star Wars premiere. I mean, it kind of dates us a little bit, but
that adjective is very appropriate, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because I don't know. I'm excited to see it, but I don't hold great faith that I will end up enjoying it, if that's a good way of putting it.
And upon reflection, I meant adverb, not adjective.
Yeah,
that's the English major in me. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, a lot of folks are talking about that film right now.
Yeah.
And obviously, we just recently did a podcast on Star Wars.
Right.
So,
which is kind of like it was in my mind, and then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the end of a 9-movie saga era, whatever, but corporately produced. Ooh, that has some.
wow.
So I'm cautiously optimistic, as they say, about it, and we'll go from there.
Well, and when this podcast airs, the movie will have been out for so long that there may have been an apocalypse and no one will ever hear this anyway.
That's true. That's true. There may have been rioting in the streets and, things burned down or whatever. So, yeah.
Things on fire, War of the Worlds, whatever have you.
There you go. What about you? What have you been doing?
I have been doing a little, I guess, side hustle research for the Star Trek podcast, and I watched a documentary called For the Love of Spock.
Oh, really?
Have you seen that?
I have not.
I highly recommend it. You're going to love it. It will probably make you cry in places.
Wait, is that the one that's directed by his son?
It is.
Yes, I have seen that one. Very good documentary.
Okay. Mm-hmm. He started filming it before Leonard Nimoy died, but it's got a collection of interviews from lots of folks, including Shatner and Takei and several of the actors that are in the current films. Chris Pine, the guy that plays McCoy, who I can never remember his name, and the guy that plays Scotty from Shaun of the Dead. I can't remember his name either. Is it Simon Pegg, maybe?
Simon Pegg, yep.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating documentary. I'm not going to give too much away. I think you folks, if you're obviously if you're listening to us, you probably have a degree of interest in the original Star Trek and Mr. Spock. One of the things that did strike me and speaks volumes as to his integrity was that when this series had been canceled and they were going on a few years later to do the animated series, he was cast, Shatner was cast, and James Doohan and Majel Barrett were cast. And James Doohan and Majel Barrett were to do all the voices of the other male and female characters. And Leonard Nimoy said, wait a minute, this show is about diversity, and if you don't bring Takei and Nichelle Nichols in here, I'm not interested. Which I was like, nice move.
Yeah.
Nice move.
Definitely.
So,
and we may do it at the end of the Patreon special we're doing now, but the animated series actually has some really cool scripts and some really cool ideas. They just truncated them down to a half hour and made them childlike for an animated cartoon.
Yeah,
a lot of the scripts were scripts that had been in pre-production of, in it when the series was on. So, David Gerald did one, and several people, and it's got some great writers to it. So, there are some good points to the animated series, and one of those being they kept the originals. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I can't tell you that I've ever seen an episode. I'm sure I've seen parts of an episode, but I've never sat down and watched those. So
you should. That might be fun to do. Yeah, that would be fun to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
That's interesting you watch that. There's also a couple of other really cool documentaries that are Star Trek related, like Trekkies. There's a Trekkies and a Trekkies 2, which is basically more of a documentary on the whole fandom of Star Trek and how it first started with the first conventions, and then, how it first started with the letter writing campaign to save it the second and third years, and then how it went from there. And it's really cool. Both of those documentaries are really good.
Well, very good. And that's kind of appropriate that we're talking a little bit of sci-fi because, awkward segues aside, our topic today is a classic science fiction film. That would be The War of the Worlds from 1953. George Powell production.
George Powell production. Yeah, Byron Haskin directed. They actually credit H.G. Wells in the writing of it, since it was based on his original novel. But for those of you who don't know the story, in a nutshell, it is about an invasion of the Earth by Mars and how the Earth reacts to it. It takes place in a small town in California, but then encompasses the entire world. There's lots of keys that came from it, and lots of keys that, of course, that it took from other sources. Most notably, of course, as I said, H.G. Wells' original novel, which was set in Victorian England and was about an invasion from Mars. But what did you think of this? This is my genre, so I'm going to like this movie, of course. But what about you? What's your take on it?
Well, this has always been a favorite of mine. I'll give you my first memory of it. I remember seeing it either a Saturday or Sunday afternoon on television. Uh-huh. And I was doing something. It's one of those things where you're doing something and you want to have something on in the background. And I want to say, and it may be because as we're recording this, it's close to Christmas, I want to say I was wrapping presents. But I distinctly remember seeing the ships on TV, and all of a sudden I was watching it. I was like sitting down and sucked into it like nobody's business. I mean, I was not going anywhere. I was going to finish this movie. And it was at a very early age. I would have probably been not driving age. I would have been at home. I wouldn't have been going anywhere or having an outside life, pretty much. Uh-huh. So it was just one of those things. I mean, we talk a lot about how we see films, we've seen horror movies on Shock Theater or one of those late night Friday or Saturday things. I just distinctly remember this being on an afternoon. Mm-hmm.
My first viewing of it was around the same. It was on the afternoon, in the afternoon on a Saturday. It was on television. I remember loving it from the very first thing, and also being scared in places of it during it. Loved the ships, of course. I ended up buying a model when they finally came out with the model of the ships, and had one of those, and even had the green a light in it, so that the green showed up. And I, at that time, had not heard about Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast or any of that. So this was like a totally new story for me. I had read the story, but I had not heard about Orson Welles' thing when I first saw the movie. So that was interesting.
Yeah. And of course, obviously, we saw it on television because it came out before we were born. But I think another reason for my attraction to it is the attraction I talked about a lot on this podcast, and that's a post-apocalyptic story. This is actually more of a pre-apocalyptic story, or a, in medias res apocalyptic story.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing the beginning of the devastation of the planet, which is, it was captivating to me as a kid, for sure. And it still is, in books and movies.
Uh-huh. And you like that in general anyway, though. I mean, when we did Independence Day, you were talking about the post-apocalyptic and how they, in that one, you don't think they did it well. But then in other ones, that's one of the things that we've always talked about was, that post-apocalyptic world and the fact that you're always drawn to those stories of how people survive.
I'm sucker for it.
Yeah.
Good or bad. I can't tell you how many bad novels I have on my shelf that are post-apocalyptic.
Uh-huh.
And most of them I finished just because I was like, it's got to get better. And I Am Legend. That's one of my favorites, and that's a post-apocalyptic novel too. So,
well, Matheson.
Anyway, do you want to talk a little background maybe about Haskin, or is it Barry Lyndon that wrote it, or Barre? He's got an accent on his name.
Barre Lyndon,
that wrote the screenplay. Barre, yeah.
The production in general. The biggest key, of course, from this movie is the original novel by H.G. Wells, which was immensely popular when it came out. One of the first people to option the story was hopefully going to make the movie of this novel was Alfred Hitchcock, ironically. They wanted to keep it in England. They wanted to do that, but George Powell ended up getting the rights to it, and wanted to do. And actually, the next kind of iteration was Ray Harryhausen, and those of you who are genre fans should know that name from the early science fiction movies where Ray Harryhausen did all the stop animation. He was a student and I cannot remember the name, darn it. He was the student of the animator who first did King Kong. And then Harryhausen went on to do the Golden Voyage of Sinbad and Clash of the Titans and many other movies.
Fathoms creature from something Fathoms, yeah.
20,000 Miles to Earth, that whole thing. So he always had these really incredibly cool monsters, and naturally he wanted to do the Martians themselves, but he didn't get to do it because George Powell, who produced it, ended up wanting to update it and tell a modern-esque story with it. So that's why he commissioned Barre to do the screenplay for it. The studio itself had a lot of backing on it. It was a Paramount movie. I cannot remember his name, but the lead guy at Paramount at the time really pushed for this movie and really wanted George Powell to do it and wanted it to be a success. And there's a story of Powell when he first started shopping it around. He went to Paramount and he went to a guy named Frank Freeman. And Freeman was essentially the big executive in charge of all projects. So he read all the scripts and he green-lighted stuff for production. And Powell went into his office, and he'd already done a couple of movies for Paramount, so he was known there. And he said, here's my new script. And Freeman, the story goes that Freeman looked at him and said, you know where this script belongs? And he threw it in the trash can. And
oh, wow.
When he did, Powell literally jumped over the desk and started yelling at him and screaming and attacking him and everything else until the head of Paramount came in from the office next door and said, what's going on? He told him the story, and he looked at Freeman and said, George can make this movie and he can make it any way he wants. So again, this was at a time when it was the big studio system, especially now. This was the big 50s where movies were being threatened by television, so everybody wanted to put everything they could into them, and the studios had contract players and all of that. So it was a big time for them. Did you know anything in particular about Barre?
I do not. I did notice that the director and Barre, the writer, were kind of part of the studio system, as you usually say. It looked like they did a lot of movies I've not heard of in the past.
Yeah.
The one that interests me, ironically enough, is George Powell, because even though the director and the writer are ultimately responsible for the picture, George Powell's the one that fought to get it made, and he's got quite a history. I learned that he was an animator in Europe before he came to America, and that he patented types of animation, including something called puppetoons.
Yes, puppetoons.
Yeah, and he traveled from, he was originally Hungarian, he went to Berlin, he went to Prague before he finally came to the States and got in the film industry. And he did a puppetoons over here as well.
Yes,
and then eventually science fiction. Mm-hmm.
Loved science fiction, was always a big science fiction geek sort of thing. Right before this, I think, I'm not sure the year, but a couple of years before this, he had done When Worlds Collide.
Right.
I knew George Powell. The first time I ever heard about George Powell, ironically, because even when I first saw this movie, I thought, oh, great movie, da-da-da-da, but didn't really click with George Powell. It didn't really resonate with me. And I remember years later when Starlog, one of the first Starlog covers was Destination Moon. That typical pointy silver rocket ship image that you used to have in the 30s, 40s, and 50s science fiction, that long, tall rocket ship thing. And that was what was in Destination Moon. And I remember seeing that movie and loving it, and found out, oh, that's the same guy who did War of the Worlds. Oh, okay. So now it clicks,
Well, yeah, as soon as I read the history, I've been keeping a secondary list of films to incorporate into our primary list of movies for another season. And I immediately added When Worlds Collide, because I was like, you know what, that might be a good one. And I've never seen it, so I put it on there. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
so
and
there voted in.
There are lots of other, connections, links, keys, whatever, that come from Haskins, the director, because he was, like you said, he was a contract player at the time. He did a lot of studio work, but he actually came from being an assistant director at Selznick Pictures. So he had worked with David O. Selznick, who you know from.
So Gone with the Wind.
Of course.
Right.
He did Disney's very first live action movie. They had been doing animation. Their first live action was Treasure Island in 1950, and Byron Haskins directed it. But
I'll remember that movie.
He also did another one of my classics that I like. It's called, and it sounds like it's one of those movies that has a stupid title, but it's a really good story. And I wish they just retitled it. It was called Robinson Crusoe on Mars. And
I love that movie.
It's great.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great movie.
Yeah, that's Byron Haskins too. And the one note I have on here that I was going to get you is, because I thought you would like it, was he also, in the 60s, he did a bunch of television. And he did a few episodes of a series that we both like called Outer Limits. And he did the one that's one of my favorite Outer Limits of all time, called Demon with a Glass Hand. And that was written by
Harlan Ellison.
By Harlan Ellison, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
nice.
Yeah, so he's a pedigree science fiction guy. I mean, as far as he did a lot of science fiction. And he did Architects of Fear. He did a lot of Outer Limits. Plus, like I said, if your thing has War of the Worlds and Robinson Crusoe on Mars, you're pretty up there in my book, kind of thing.
Oh, well, I'm glad to find out my status in your book.
He also did another one that I really liked a lot called From the Earth to the Moon, which was a remake of the original, From the Earth to the Moon, Jules Verne story that he did too. And it was a pretty good adaptation of that. Joseph Cotton was in it, and it was a pretty good movie.
I'm sorry, I got lost in thought there for a second because I remembered you mentioning Jules Verne as a favorite in the bonus material we did for Patreon.
Yes.
So I would see why you would like that movie because you like Jules Verne, who also
he was my
did
first
other
science fiction author. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, like 20,000 Leagues and.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
What did you think of the cast of this one?
I actually love the cast, but
I do
for
too.
once, I don't have a lot of notes about the cast. As far as, contenders or anything. I don't have any. I don't know if those people were just studio people or they were, unknowns.
Exactly. No, I can tell you why. Because Gene Barry was immediately associated with it. With George Powell, when he got the rights and everything else and got the go-ahead from Paramount, the first person he wanted was Gene Barry. And he went to him and said, I want you in this. And then they ended up casting everybody from the studio system. So, especially Anne Robinson. Because she actually came from she was in the acting pool there. And basically, they would just do, if they weren't doing movies, they were teaching classes to other younger actors on how to be in movies. That was their day rate. Okay. And they were paid, whatever it was, $100 a week or whatever, but they were in the movies kind of thing. So that's where everybody, and that's why when you look around in the group shots in this movie, you see, that's the dude who was, who later went on to be in Green Acres. And, that's the dude over there who's in these movies, You start seeing
exactly
all these.
What I said. Oh, my God, Green Acres dude. Yeah, and I noticed that, since a lot of it's filmed on a soundstage, it feels like a theatrical production sometimes when you see those crowd shots and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
To
definitely.
me, it did anyway. The only gripe I had with Anne Robinson was her hairstyle was 10 years old. I was like, why is she in a 40s hairstyle in a 50s movie? Did you notice that?
I did, and that was actually a wig that she hated.
Because she looked like one of the Andrews sisters or Joan Crawford or something. I was like, what is that hair? It is out of place.
I totally agree. And I don't have any information on why they went with that decision. It was very odd that they picked that. She looked beautiful. She was well filmed. I thought she, when she wasn't screaming, she did a great job. There's a part in a documentary I watched on it where Haskins would come up to her and go, "Okay, Anne, my dear, what size scream will we be doing today?" Or what scared face will we have on today? Kind of thing. So
that's funny.
Yeah.
And as far as Gene Barry, he's a good-looking guy. He was suitable for the part. He reminded me a lot of other genre leads of the 50s and 60s, like Rod Taylor, or that guy that played Sam Loomis in Psycho. His name escapes me right now.
Yes.
But that's the kind of Gene Barry. He was perfectly fine in that role.
Yeah. It's Dr. Clayton Forrester. Yeah, he reminded, one of the keys I have is he reminded me of what Bruce Campbell wants to be. That kind of strong-jawed leading man who has the good lines and is really cool kind of thing. Because he's great from his first scene in this where they're fishing together.
I'm a scientist, but I also camp.
Right. Yeah. And I can
Pass
square
those
dance.
Pork and beans. That's another gripe I have. I was like, why are they doing this weird square dance transition? It's really bizarre. But,
that was it was a curious choice for me that they wanted to do this.
I think it was because it was so fast. It was like, I need a place to stay. Well, you can stay at our house. And cut. He's at a square dance dancing with Ann Robinson.
There's a dance tonight. Yeah. So.
Yeah, they needed some time passage, and they were just trying to do it as quickly as they could.
Yeah, plus the fact that I think, they had to achieve the goals. He has to fall in love with her. She has to fall in love with him. He has to see, how nice this little town is so that it can be destroyed. So we're invested in, please don't kill all the hill people or whatever. I did have a note that even watching it this past week to do this podcast, it's a stretch for me to think of the beginning of this as California. It feels like the South or the Midwest without the desert, or that sort of thing. It never feels like California, and then suddenly they're 25 miles from Los Angeles.
Nah, it feels like California to me because of that Mexican guy in there. It's like they were trying to make... I'm serious. I'm not trying to be racist or anything, but it was like they purposefully put a Hispanic actor in there because at that time there were more Hispanic people in California than there were elsewhere in America.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. But it could have been Texas,
Well,
Would
yeah, I
it
guess
still
it
work
could have
for me?
been. I guess it could have been, but there was a lot of Californianness to me in the film. I guess ideally speaking, I'm trying not to get political here.
Yeah, I might have bought it if it was, if maybe it was Northern California and they were attacking San Francisco or something. Mm-hmm. I might have bought that because Northern California does look like that. It's very hilly and green and verdant and pretty and all that. But, I could have easily seen this as North Carolina. Sort of thing to me. It was this, and that's kind of like, I guess because I grew up in Tennessee, that's what I visualized when I saw it. I was going,
saw those spaceships coming over the Smoky Mountains. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. They're attacking Mayberry, or whatever. Yeah. But screenplay wise, so let's talk about it. There's not a lot of casting stuff because we do like the cast. I think I even like the what was his name? The guy that played the general, Les Tremayne. I thought was was good in it. Mm-hmm. He's always played that character, that kind of forceful authoritarian general or politician or boss, whatever, and he does it really well and with a kind of sincere side to him. But screenplay wise, I just recently, last October, I did a live action stage version of War of the Worlds. And I got to play Orson and got to do all that. And basically it was, the first act was the radio broadcast and the second act was everything that happened after it. All the hysteria and all of that. And I think, this is a pretty interesting screenplay version of that novel and a lot of keys and homages back to the radio broadcast itself.
I had a feeling that
Did you kind of see that?
Yeah. I've got a few notes about the opening in particular. My first note is kind of funny, and I think you'll agree. But the opening credit music sounded like 70s television music. It was really
oh my gosh,
bizarre.
It's so heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is so in your face. Dun, dun, dun,
yeah,
dun, 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 dun. Yeah.
And then by the time that simmers down and they get to the opening narration, it's really eloquent, the narration about Mars. And I thought, you know what? I think they lifted those directly from the novel. Unless maybe they lifted them directly from the radio broadcast. I'm not sure.
It's actually you're very good instincts. It's a very good hybrid of both. Okay. Because the guy who wrote the radio version for Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater took a lot of inspiration from the novel, of course, and he took like the opening and ending of the novel to make the radio broadcast, and this is very similar.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. And with infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space. Yet across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, intellects vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us.
Okay, 70s music aside.
Yeah, 70s music aside. Well,
yeah,
but
what's
that's
weird
not in
is
that.
how do you get 1970s music in a 1953 film? I mean, that's bizarre to me.
Yeah.
I had never heard that kind of music in another film.
Well, now wait, isn't there also a teaser? Like before the credits, isn't there like an old newsreel, right? With man fought wars against themselves and blah, blah, blah. Really heavy-handed and big. Mm-hmm. Right? And then we get to the end of the credits and suddenly we're looking at Mars and we get this whole astral feel and everything's quiet and the narrator's telling the whole story.
The narration I'm talking about that may be lifted from the movie, from the radio or the novel, is when they talk about the different planets, which were more suitable and which were not. And they go through all 9 planets of the solar system and then finally come to Earth. Yeah. That's the part I liked, though.
And that's with Sir Cedric Hardwicke, who was a great voiceover narrator at the time. He did 10 Commandments also for Cecil B. DeMille. So he had that really great voice, and he does that whole thing about, they were regarding our world with, cool intellectual eyes, seething with hatred, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Who is this Moses?
Yeah.
Bring him to me now. Sorry, I was possessed momentarily by Yul Brynner.
The actual first line of that lead-in commentary is one of the lines that opens the radio broadcast, which is, no one would have believed in the middle of the 20th century that human affairs were being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's. It's such a cool, they unsympathetic eyes, and they, it's really well written. And then they do this little, like you said, Astrobiology 101. Let's talk about the other planets and how Earth is the only one they can look at. Mm-hmm. So I have in my notes, I love all the radio homage. So I like the fact that they tell stories, they perpetuate the plot through people listening in on radios all over the world in different places. And the radio broadcaster guy who's actually there standing on the truck with his microphone, which is directly out of the radio play, not the novel. So there's all of that because, of course, the novel was set before radio and all of that.
Yeah, the novel was written in like 1897, I believe.
Yeah. But I just have my notes that I took while I was watching, and it has some of that I like. I'm proud of myself. It says, like, one of Les Tremaine's first lines is when he sees Professor Forrester. He shakes his hand and says, "Oh, how have you been? I haven't seen you since Oak Ridge."
Oh,
and I'm like,
yeah.
Yay, Tennessee.
Well, and they plant that in there, as a bit of a foreshadowing, too.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because, this is... It's interesting that they didn't do a lot of the Cold War stuff in this script. I have that in my notes. Because we did Day the Earth Stood Still, and it's the entire script is, they're coming from over there, meaning them commies kind of thing.
Well, and one of the actors was blacklisted, too.
Yeah.
The professor.
But they didn't do this in this script. They didn't mention Soviets. They didn't mention Russia. They didn't mention any of that.
No.
Instead, they mentioned nuclear, but there is no, this threat is interstellar. It's not international. So I thought that was very interesting that they didn't do that.
They mentioned London more than anything, and I assume that's an homage to its author.
Of course, yeah. And the original novel and everything else. I like the plot. I like the way it moves forward. I like following him and her, although there are some, in David Logic World, there's some sketchy stuff like, okay, we've got this nest. And even in certain special effects shot, we watched 3 more ships land. So there's like 8 ships. So all of these war machines, and they literally say like 3 different times they're 25 miles from Los Angeles. And yet it takes them like 4 days to get there.
Well,
yet
they move really slow.
But the professor and the girl end up, cutting the head off the thing and walking to Los Angeles faster than they can get there? Really? I was going, what? It makes no sense, really. It doesn't.
Yeah, a lot of the world, or should I say, nationwide stuff with him looking for her and that guy. That's a lot of that stuff didn't make sense to me either, but it was part of the drama. They got to give a little bit of tension in there.
Yeah.
As far as like traveling to different places and getting separated and that kind of stuff, a lot of that didn't make sense to me.
Well, I do think there are some 50s cliche storytelling in here. The weak woman who screams at everything is in there, of course. And the, we're instantly in love and now we're a couple, so I'm going to chase you, 5 city blocks.
God almighty, what a square dance can do.
Woo! All a man left or whatever they do there. And there's some time frame truncation there. They talk about Paris is gone, so-and-so, Rio is gone, da-da-da. Yet, literally, they landed first, 25 miles from Los Angeles, and they're not here yet? I don't understand.
Well, maybe more, blasted down in different continents. You never know. There could have been more meteors.
I would believe that, but they said this was the pilot vehicle. It helped guide all of the rest of them down. Da-da-da-da. There's all of that. So, again, they're supposing that, but it was
so analytical.
There I go again.
No, I agree.
Even watching it again this week, I do remember still getting really just upset about the riot scene. I've always been really upset about that scene. It's like, idiots, give humans enough time and they just get stupid.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't know, and he's saying those instruments, they're our only hope of preventing, and they're beating him up and throwing him off the truck and all. And I always got incensed every time I watched this. I always go, that's terrible. Why are you doing that, you idiots? But
let's talk a bit about the special effects.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the sound and the effects are just super cool. They're still cool.
Always.
The sound in particular. And I think you knew this, or you probably know this. I read this, that some of the sounds were lifted and augmented for Star Trek sounds.
Yes.
Yeah.
They did do that.
Yeah. And
especially that thump, that dum 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 right before it fires and stuff. Yeah, and then the photon torpedo sounds, which are photon torpedo. Yeah.
Yeah, some really really cool stuff, and it won. It won awards for those. It won an Oscar for special effects, and it was a nominee for sound and editing as well. So,
well, and the two people really responsible are, and I've got their names, Al Nazaki. He's the one that designed the alien machines. So that was his design and helped build them too. And they were really, they were big miniatures. They were like 12, 14 feet wide, these ships. And had electronics in them so that they could light up and the net could crane and they could do all that stuff. And then Charles Gamora, I think is his name, was in charge of all the special effects. So he's the one that said we're going to put sparklers in the floor of the miniatures so it looks like, and then we'll later on animate the tripod legs. I loved that whole design. That whole, when they floated, they were floating on 3 beams, and you could barely see the beams sometimes, and then they set sparkles on the floor. That was really cool.
And the same with the force fields when they tried to shoot the flying things, you would see like a dome shape.
Yes.
Over them. Yeah.
Yeah, and they did that by just superimposing a regular glass dome that they shot against a black background and then just superimposed it over the thing. And I've got that note. I've got, because Forrester, the Barry character, he says they have a protective blister. And I thought, see, I'm so glad he didn't say shield. Because I hear shields so many times.
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about Independence Day, and it was, they got shields too. And it was just, can we not use shield? Can we use a different? And I like protective blister. I'm going to use that note. Know the script.
Yeah, I think the only weakness, special effects wise, may have been in the actual creature design. And they were real smart to not show it that much.
Mm-hmm.
Like
I agree.
You see one quick instance of it out the window when she sees it, and I immediately thought, was that E.T.? That was weird. It just kind of shot it out. Woo!
Yeah.
And then you see the hands, come out of the, when it dies. So I think it was kind of good that they knew where to cut their losses and just not show as much of it.
Agreed, and that's because there's 2 reasons. One, just as a throwaway, a key from that is the reason you got that impression is because Spielberg did want E.T. when he first ran away and we saw him run through like that. What was to mimic that shot from War of the Worlds.
Oh, that's how funny! And I barely remember that movie. That's great.
Yeah, that and he's running with his arms up in the air. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Gamora, the special effects guy, he's actually in that suit when you see the suit in the close-up with her when she screams. The typical arm comes up and touches her shoulder, that classic iconic shot, and she turns around and screams, and there it is with its 3 eyes. But they had designed a creature, and Powell and Haskins came to look at it and didn't like it. Because they had designed the creature to be about 6 feet tall. And Powell said, no, cut it down. It needs to be waist high. I want it small, So they literally overnight had to rebuild the creature. And it was falling apart when they filmed it. As a matter of fact, she said, and I didn't go back and look, but one of the special effects, his daughter worked on it overnight with him. And she said, in fact, one of the shots you see of the creature, you can see its arm unwinding, the tape unwinding on its arm.
How funny.
Because they had just patched it together to shoot, and that's, I think, why they ended up cutting it down so much and just, using it for a shock effect and then go.
And I think some of what I saw of the design that was off to me was the fact that it looked like the body was big and the arms and legs were thin and like stick-like. And I was like, that's kind of odd. It reminded me of I can't remember what the creature was, but like from Schoolhouse Rock, maybe. Was it Hanker for a Hunk of Cheese? Was that a weird-looking little cartoon thing that sang that song? So there's a key for you.
Oh my God!
No, I may be completely wrong, but it seems like it's a cartoon I'm remembering, but not like a well-known cartoon. More like something from like those Schoolhouse Rock things.
So not SpongeBob or anything.
No, or well, you know what? That is kind of what it looked like too. SpongeBob.
yeah. Little baby legs and arms and
a big
head
square
kind of
body. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then of course you can't talk about effects without talking about the scene where the electric eye comes in the window and is seeking them out, and then eventually this precedes that scene where the creature runs away. The hand on the shoulder, which is kind of iconic too.
Oh yeah, both of those. Mm-hmm. And you know that whole probe thing, I guess, with the three eyes and everything that came in the window. You know, Spielberg takes that entire thing for his remake. He uses that entire scene that way, with them trying to hide from it and everything else. His is a lot scarier, but
I don't think I've seen
he does
the
it
remake.
in the remake.
I know.
Well, naturally, because it stars what's his name? Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. So, I guess I could have watched it for this podcast, but no.
No. Thank you. Well, let's see some other special effects. Oh, I love the, I've got in my notes the disintegration effect. You know, when they finally, well, first of all, poor preacher. He goes out there trying to spread God to the other alien worlds, and yea, though I walk through the valley.
Oh, I've got shit to say about that too, but anyway, you keep going.
Well, anyway, so they attack, and then the creatures retaliate, the Martians retaliate, and they start disintegrating people. And the effect was the same effect as the one used in Day the Earth Stood Still, with that whole kind of, they glow for a second in shape and kind of weird, and then they melt and they're gone.
Yeah, but
that kind of thing. Except
in this, you actually see their skeleton for a second, which is awesome.
Well, yeah, not one shot with the dude. Yeah.
I mean, I was like, wow, that is a really cool effect. It's like they glow bright. Yeah. You see their skeleton, and then they're gone. And if you look at the ground, there's just ash shaped like their body or whatever.
Yeah. And Spielberg does that same shot in his remake too. He does the whole. You can see the skeleton through when they glow. But I thought that was really a cool effect and really kind of creepy at the time, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it reminded me of when we used to make movies and everything else. Those short films. I love the whole camera airplane POV flying over the miniature. You know, it's the fake trees and the fake miniature, and they come up over the ridge, and you see the three alien ships, and then they curve, and it's just holding the camera to make the effect, but it looks so cool.
Yeah,
I love that.
Well, I mean, there's so much about the movie that looks cool. I mean, I know a lot of it has to do with sound stages, but one of the reasons I think this movie is appealing to people, other than the story and the effects, is the look of it. It's like one of those really richly colored movies from the 50s.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, is it in Technicolor? I don't recall.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It was filmed in Technicolor, which...
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Huge cameras. Huge, giant cameras to do Technicolor at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really cool. Yeah. The Martian hand at the end, that's another iconic, where the door opens and just the arm comes out.
Right.
And then he dies.
Mm-hmm.
Very iconic image, very cool. If you look, you can actually see the veins.
Right. And then he touches it, and I'm like, what? Don't touch it. It's either going to grab you or contaminate you. Something's going to happen.
Oh, my God. It's going to turn into a zombie. Yeah. And he's going to spread it all over the world. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look how they died. How do you know you're not going to get something from them?
Well, true,
Some
too.
kind of
you could get
alien
a Martian
bacteria.
microorganism.
Right.
Yeah. Now we're in Andromeda strain.
Oh, I just remembered my key that I forgot earlier. I'm writing it down.
Write that bad boy down.
I've got a little bit of trivia.
Sure.
I wrote down that the H.G. Wells estate loved the movie so much they gave George Pal his choice of another novel to make. and he chose.
Really?
Yeah, he chose the time machine, which is now on my list for future projects. So.
Well, another good one. Not, I don't think as good as When Worlds Collide and War of the Worlds, but it's still a good version of Time
Yeah,
Machine.
but it's Rod Taylor and Yvette Mimieux. I love saying her name.
Well, yeah,
Mimieux.
Yvette Mimieux.
Mimieux.
Mimieux. She's a laser beam. Mimieux. Mimieux.
And Morlock. You can't go wrong with a good Morlock.
Well, that's true. Morlocks are important there. That's cool trivia. What else you got?
Well, I was going to get into it earlier, and now that I'm at this trivia note, there's a lot of religious context in this film.
Mm-hmm.
And H.G.
Yes.
Wells was agnostic, which I find kind of funny.
Yep.
But I love the scene where the preacher gets annihilated. I just love that. I mean, he's like, I have to do this. This is my duty. I've walked through the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil. And everybody's staring at him. No, no. And then just whammo, he is gone. And, of course, you got one of those screams that you were talking about from, what's her face? and it's I guess back in the day, that was like shocking, you're killing a preacher on the screen or something. I don't know if that was like a big taboo or something. It was obviously supposed to be really effective, and in some ways still is. But then you've also got the whole ending with them in the church.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that the last line is, killed by the smallest thing God had created on this earth.
Right.
That's a direct religious and that is not in the novel. That is, I do not believe. I think that comes from the radio play.
No, and you know what? That kind of shit went on. We talked about this about The Day the Earth Stood Still. They added that shit, and Robert Wise didn't like it. And I have a feeling that H.G. Wells would not have liked it in this film as well. Except maybe the preacher.
Well, there is a key there, except the preacher. There's a key in there for me from The Thing, because it reminds me of that standard. The scientist has to go and try to communicate. Except in this one, it's the priest going to try to communicate, and no, the creature's just going to kill you. Don't walk up there. It's not going to work.
Oh, that makes me laugh.
So
yeah, that collar doesn't work.
You.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that would have been better if it had been just a little kid.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Hey, Mr. Spaceman, I just want to be your friend.
Yeah.
My skeleton.
Oh no.
Okay. So, all right. So anyway, that was another thing I wanted to touch on, just the fact that there is a lot of heavy-handed religious context in the film.
Very much.
It's almost as if they're saying, it was almost as if they were saying divine intervention at the end. With them finding each other in the church and holding each other and praying so hard, and then, the spaceships are falling out of the sky. They're no longer dangerous. So, yeah. So that is all the notes I have other than keys. Do we need to segue, or did you have something else you wanted to talk about?
No, I'm good. I'm good to segue to keys.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do those.
Well, the first one I had was already mentioned, and that was that the sound effects were later augmented for Star Trek. And then one that you mentioned, which is kind of an elephant in the room also, is the October 30th, 1938 broadcast that Orson Welles did that freaked everybody out on the radio.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
so much of that script is actually incorporated in this script. That's a huge key. I mean, now I'm trying to just do some quick research just to make sure, but I'm pretty certain that last line about they were destroyed by the smallest thing God had, in his infinite wisdom had ever, had planted on the earth. That's from the radio play, not from the novel. I'm fairly certain. So,
I'm pretty
key
sure
wise.
it is too. I mean, just coming from his background, I would think that would be true if he's agnostic.
Yeah.
I do find that a little bit of a cop out of an ending, though. It's like, why did it just now happen? Why didn't it happen sooner? But,
Well, it actually happens faster in the movie because supposedly the movie covers 3 days, although it feels longer to me when I watch it. But I read a thing where supposedly it covers 3 days, but in the book it's 3 weeks before the Martians die.
oh,
So,
okay.
So there's a truncated time frame there, no matter what. Let's see. I have a key. The evacuation, when they evacuate Los Angeles and they're showing all that stuff. There's a huge montage of, the roads and the city hall being evacuated and all of that, with the narration saying stuff about get out or whatever. It reminded me of 10 Commandments. It reminded me of, and Pharaoh said you could go forth from Egypt and blah, blah, blah. And it shows them all with their little wagons and all their stuff and chickens and stuff.
Oh, that's hilarious. I would have never got that.
It just got me, And then
Well,
after that, the other key I have is, when they finally close in on Los Angeles and they destroy the City Hall building and it blows into a million pieces. All of that reminded me of Independence Day. Of course, I think they took all of that from War of the Worlds.
Yeah, I could see that. I just haven't seen 10 Commandments in a while, so I didn't remember that. But I do see the...
Tim, you should watch it every year. Yeah.
I probably did until I was a teenager. I have one that I've used before that is blatantly obvious but kind of comical, is the Lonesome Death of Geordie Verrill segment from Creepshow. When the meteor lands,
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? What is that? That's a meteor.
That's a meteor.
Don't touch it. It's
Holy
hot.
creepers. Yeah.
I'll stick around till it cools down, in perhaps about 24 hours. That's what George Barry says. Gene Barry.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so true. I hadn't gotten that one. That's a good one. I have. This is such a. I think this was such a template for a lot of the bug-eyed monster movies that came out, and science fiction. This Island Earth, It Came from Outer Space, Tarantula, Them, all those have whoever the hero guy is, whether he's a scientist or a cop or just the boyfriend, and then the girl, and they have either just met or just started their relationship, and then they have to survive whatever this horrible thing is that happens. It seems to go all the way through a lot of those 50s genre movies.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big key from a storytelling perspective.
Well, and a good segue to my key, which is just George Powell in general, did these science fiction movies. And there's a song called Science Fiction from the Rocky Horror Picture Show where they even say, George Powell to his bride, I'm going to give you some terrible thrills. I mean, that's a lyric from the song.
But when worlds collide, said George Powell to his bride, I'm gonna give you some terrible thrills.
And a lot of the movies that are mentioned in that, a lot of the movies that are mentioned in that song we've covered or are going to cover, and a lot of them are George Powell movies.
Yep.
Including
When Worlds Collide, Destination Moon. Yeah. Yep. Very true. That I have that one too. You got me on that one. That was good. I have two little. See, you have another key. Give me a key because I just found two little trivia points I wanted to say too.
I looked up the origins of this word, and it was being used first in the 40s. So I guess the word was around before the film was around. But there is a point, I think. I can't remember exactly when it is. I'm sure it's when something comes out of the spaceship, like maybe the electric eye, where one old man says, "What is that gizmo?" And I thought, Gizmo. That's the name of that gremlin in the movie Gremlins from the 80s. Where did that word come from? So I looked it up, and apparently it was around a decade earlier. But
Okay.
Gizmo is slang, for a device, so to speak, and then eventually ended up being the name of an iconic film of the 80s, iconic Christmas film of the 80s, where and Howie Mandel did his voice, Gizmo. So loose connection, but I was kind of intrigued by the word Gizmo.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that.
We mentioned the Wells radio play, and I mentioned the George Powell future connection of Time Machine, which would be a little bit of a key because he did another Wells project a decade later. But my biggest and last key is the M. Night Shyamalan movie Signs.
I could see that. When they're trapped in the cabin and everything.
Well, it's not that so much because really you don't see a lot of the alien in Signs, but the way the alien ends up dying is because of water. And I was like, wow, that's almost like War of the Worlds, where it just ended up being bacteria. So, it was something very innocuous that ended up killing the threat to humanity.
Very true. Good point.
Yeah, so that was my big key as far as that's concerned. And I wouldn't mind adding Signs to that list, too. I kind of like that movie.
Yeah, that makes sense. Those are good ones.
And that's what I have.
I had just a couple of little trivia things. George Powell is actually in the movie. He has a cameo. He was actually sitting, listening to the radio in one of those montage scenes where they're listening to the radio.
That's cool.
The movie, Paramount really didn't think the movie would be very popular. So they didn't have a big premiere for this movie. They just kind of opened it. They didn't have a premiere in Hollywood and everything else. And Anne Robinson was actually in New York the day it opened. And lines were like around the building. Everybody thought it was going to be great. And the whole public, Paramount was thrown off by how popular it was the first weekend. But she talks in a biography about how she went up to the box office and said, is there any way I could go in and see the movie? Because she'd never seen it. There was no premiere. She had never seen it. And they were saying, well, get in line and get a ticket. And she goes, well, I'd really like to see it. And I don't think I can wait in line. I'm Anne Robinson. And they were going, yeah, right. And she's going, no, really. I'm Anne Robinson. And she had to show her ID and everything. But they ended up letting her in to see it. And that's how she got to see the movie the first
Your
time.
hair doesn't look like that.
Right. You don't look like you're in 1940.
No,
you, can't
you don't
do
look
that.
like an Andrews sister. Ooh, dated references. They don't even make me look old. They're like my parents' references.
Most of the soldiers you see, especially in the large montage shots or like in the destruction shots, are real soldiers. They're not actors because they actually went to where one of the army districts was on bivouac or on, maneuvers and shot while they were running around. So the tanks were all real. That was all real stuff. And they had to run around and just shoot stuff and catch shots when they could. I started looking at it going, especially with all these miniatures and everything else, they're using like real fire and real explosions and real smoke and stuff like that. Yet the laser beams were all animated on. The death rays or the beams and everything else. So all of that had to be timed and filmed and shot. And I really wondered, did they destroy the miniatures or did they, rebuild them and shoot them again or what? I thought it would be really interesting to find out about.
I read somewhere, I can't remember what it is and I didn't write it down, but I read where the models for the spaceships were donated or something and scrapped for...
Yes, they were... The shells of them were copper, literally copper, so that they would shine and be really cool. And they were given to a Boy Scout copper drive, a metal drive.
Yeah.
And they were melted down.
I did.
Yeah.
I read that. I just didn't write it down.
That is true. Yep. That is very, very true.
That's sad.
Yeah, I know. God, I would love to have one. because they were gorgeous. You know, he based the whole design on a manta ray with a cobra head, because he was trying to think of two of the scariest creatures on Earth, and how could I make a ship like that would be scary when you see it.
And I read that he originally wanted to do the tripods like from the novel, but that it was too difficult, and that he settled for this instead.
Yeah, they did, and I like the fact that they made the homage with the electromagnetic tripods or whatever. Oh, tripods like Triffids. I just thought of that. Mm-hmm. Day of the Triffids has tripod plants.
It's also in science fiction from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
They spit poison and kill. Sorry.
No, that's good. Cool.
So, any last thoughts?
Last thoughts are, I highly recommend this. I mean, I think all you guys out there listening, you know, everybody talks about CGI and effects and everything else. This is some pristine special effects from early 1950s, and well done, and a good science fiction story, a good classic science fiction novel. If you haven't read it, please do. Or, you know, go to YouTube or Netflix or whatever and find the radio broadcast and at least listen to it. It's only 55 minutes or so. But watch this movie. It's you know, Tim and I both really like it. You can tell.
Yeah, I mean, just watching it again for, I don't know how many times I've seen it. The other day, I got sucked right into it again. It's one of those. It doesn't matter how old it is. It's just a good movie. You just get into it. I don't know. A lot of it may be because they blast that preacher at the very beginning. I don't know. I mean, that's certainly an exclamation point, you know, to say, hey, you know, nothing's safe. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah, great images, great story. Yes, Sylvia or, you know, Anne's character does scream a lot, but that's okay.
Yeah, they all did back then.
Right.
Well, I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis did too. So
true. True. That will probably do us for this week, I guess.
Yeah, Tim, I think so. Nice choice.
We sum up, as always, by saying thank you guys so much for listening to us. You know, it means a lot to us that we actually have fellow geeks out there who like listening and talking about this. Please let us know. Like us, subscribe, give us reviews. Give us up. You know, the more response you guys give us, the longer we can keep doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Just pick one. Just go to one of the platforms, and leave us a review or a kind note. We would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, a thumbs up, a star, or whatever they call it. Yeah, do that.
And until then, or until next time, I'll be seeing you, Mr. Horton.